Thank you very much, Sir Hugh, and it was actually really interesting to listen to to David. Thank you, David, for coming all the way from Ireland to talk with us. It's a great pleasure to be addressing this conference, and it was interesting to hear David speak about in the recent elections for the European Union in Ireland, there was no electoral commission trying to get people interested in voting. And I'd say congratulations to you, Sir Hugh, and the Electoral Commission for the work that you're doing. And I know you're certainly active in my electorate. I've met with some of your people. I've also been to, Roberts and some of the team have been to Ethnica conference, which I opened in Auckland on Saturday, particularly being aware that as Minister of Ethnic Affairs as well as Minister of Justice, that many people in New Zealand now come from countries where voting is not necessarily the norm. In fact, voting can be dangerous, and in some cases they wonder why they would bother to vote, because it can be both dangerous and may not be counted. So it's the sort of thing where I think it's incredibly important. I don't see voting as a hassle, and I guess nobody here does, otherwise you wouldn't be here. But for some people it is, and I'm one of those lucky people who get to go and door knock at various times of the year and ask people to come out and vote. And I am always quite shocked at the number of people who say things like, oh yeah, and I try and stop myself giving them a little lecture about people losing their lives so that they have the right to vote, and occasionally I fail in stopping myself give that little lecture. In fact, quite often I fail in that one. But actually it is true. And I've been sitting wondering whether or not if I said that your right to vote is actually an entitlement, and if you don't use it, you could lose it, I reckon they'd all go out and vote. But, I'm not going to say that, so please don't quote me. Claire Trevett from the New Zealand Herald, do not quote me, I see you there. We've had a lot of discussions with the Electoral Commission about how we can get everyone to enrol and to vote. And I think every political party who's represented today thinks that those unvoting people out there are actually their voters. And so whether it's left, right, centre, whatever the spectrum is now, you all believe that they're yours. Well, they probably are, actually. And when I ask people why they're not voting, they're disinterested. They think that members of Parliament and Parliament itself is completely disconnected from them. They think we talk about stuff that they don't care about, actually. And I think the recent antics in Parliament and behaviours are the sorts of things that are complete and total turn-off for most New Zealanders, because most New Zealanders are actually interested in what we can do for them as members of Parliament and how we can make their lives better, no matter what party we're from. And they really hate it when we act like kids. And I have previously been guilty of that too. But that's what happens. They think, you guys are just stupid, and it becomes a plague on all your houses. So it's not that they don't vote for a particular party, they just don't want to vote for anyone, because they think you're all the same. I think too we need to be really careful about how we discuss voting numbers. So, we know that we've gone down the track of saying, we've had about, at one stage we had, 87, 89% of people voting? Yeah, 85% in 1981 and 69% in the last election. When I look at that, I think we've got to be careful how we deal with that, because when I talk to people who say they don't generally bother to vote, if I said to them, well, you've got to vote because lots of other people aren't, I can tell you that gives them an excuse not to vote. So if I tell them, however, well, if you don't vote, then I can tell you there are other people who are voting, and they won't be voting the same way as you, that tends to get them more interested. So I just think we're really careful how we phrase it. When we look at New Zealand and our levels of voting, and the last election was, I think, quite unusual for us, but 69%. Actually, in many other similar countries, that's actually a pretty high turnout rate. And we could go down the Australian path of compulsory voting, but actually, it doesn't feel democratic to me to do that. It feels democratic to me, and part of our Kiwi ethos, that you can't force someone to want to vote. So what they do in Australia, of course, is they spoil their ballots. So it just seems like that's not something I'd be keen on. And when you look at some of the, in the US elections and many others, you're down to about 40%. And you wonder why. Well, because they're constantly voting all the time in their Congress, their House of Representatives, but also it's a really difficult process to get through. But one of the things that we're trying to do in Ethnic Affairs is working with the Electoral Commission is to say to New Zealanders, actually this is part of being part of New Zealand. And that's why I don't want that message going out that no one else is voting. I want it to be part of this is what we do, this is part of our community. And when we're looking at things like online registration and how we can make it easier for our immigrants, our diaspora, 1 million of them, to be able to vote, and that's a really important thing that David was speaking about because, of course, Ireland's got the same sort of situation. One of the things we're doing is trying to make it easier for them to do so. But if you look at local government elections, which in New Zealand are postal elections, lots of people don't vote. Is there anyone here who wants to confess now that they didn't vote in the last local government election? You know, you can do it. You're amongst friends. You know, I've got one brave soul. I'm not going to name who that is, but because she's the only one who's brave enough to say so. Because actually, and yet that's a postal vote, the easiest vote you could do, and you have it for about 3 weeks sitting on your kitchen bench. And why don't people do it? And that's even more local and more connected, you'd think, than what we do here in central government. So I don't know that postal voting is the answer. I think actually lots of people in New Zealand who do vote like to go and be part of the community, this community involvement about this is our community and we want to be part of it. I'm not suggesting we go back to turning out to personally vote for local government elections because of the vast cost of it. And also I don't know that they would turn out now, but it is really important that we do this. And so when we're looking at how we can do this, I think it's really important that we're constantly thinking about possible situations and scenarios. Sometimes I think, though, the biggest thing that we can do is to consistently talk about why it is that it's important for people to vote. And occasionally I say to people when I'm knocking on their door and they're telling me they're not bothering to vote because it's a plague on all your houses, I say, well, you know, you should be interested in politics because the politicians are interested in you and you don't know what they're going to do. And if you don't vote, then how can you complain? And I think for some people, that's a message that does sort of resonate a bit. They can see something in it for them. So really, I think, you know, in schools and elsewhere, everywhere, we've got to get that message out. But the biggest thing that we all know, I'm sure everyone here knows as well, is that the sooner we can get people voting, as soon as they're eligible to, the more likelihood they are to continue to vote. And so that's where I think that sort of really targeting on the youth is a really good idea. That really targeting on, you know, through either through parties or through the Electoral Commission or whatever, that this is a normal part of life and it's part of being part of our community. And, you know, speaking as the mother of a 21-year-old, if we can turn it into a computer game, I would do really well. So I think, you know, maybe that's the answer, and that's we're working on that with Real Me and everything else, not necessarily the game, but certainly a computer, an internet type-based voting. You know, we are a very small, very special country. The country that was the first country in the world to have universal suffrage. Far earlier we were than our bigger, older democracies that we normally think about. And it's the sort of thing where we shouldn't take this for granted. And it is, I think, not at all an exaggeration to say that people have lost their lives so that we can vote. It is absolutely true. And yet we see how can we get amongst people the same reverence and understanding that that's what it takes to be a New Zealander, is to actually care enough about our community to bother to go down to the local school and vote, either on election day or the so many days, I think 17 days beforehand. It doesn't actually take that much. But it's the sort of thing where I think we need to build the expectation that that's what we do, and we need to be very careful in our messaging that we're not creating an excuse for not doing it. But really, it is something that we should all take very seriously. So I'd like to thank you for being here today. I know you have a very interesting agenda, and you'll have some very good speakers talking about these very interesting ideas. But what I do know too is that if everyone feels they've had their fair go, they've had their fair share, they've had their opportunity, then they're far more likely to feel part of our community. And whenever we bring people into our community and we don't distance them and make them feel that they're different and they're not used to voting, so we don't want them to be part of it, that's the sort of problem we will end up with, a very divided New Zealand. And as a country that is proudly, well, I'm very proud of it anyway, not everyone will be, but I am, of 213 different ethnicities in New Zealand, the most ethnically diverse country in the world, we should be very, very keen to make sure that everyone feels part of that. So thank you for being here today, and I look forward to hearing more about how the conference goes, and I'm sure that you will come up with some excellent ideas, which Robert will come and see me about. Okay, thank you. Have a good day.